So
Right.
I just had read your comments on the last video, and yeah, the first thing I would like to say is absolutely that was not staged, and it scared the crap out of me. So
Okay, I couldn't tell. I'm like, my gosh, just because nobody else was reacting in the room, which is great. I was like, either it's staged or the kids are just like, we're gonna let this, you know what I mean? Like,
I think they already knew what was happening, that he was just not having a good weekend and Monday. And so at that tail end of the video, luckily, I think he was starting to kind of tailspin again, just not like really using appropriate language. And then luckily the announcement for the end of class was made. So yeah, but he is also the student that I'm doing my case study on, so it kind of meshes very well.
okay. I was like, like, it was just interesting the way he was willing to, like, he was definitely spiraling, but not to the point where he wouldn't listen because as soon as you said, why don't we step out? He was like, okay, he did that, which is why I was like, maybe it's because at first I was like, oh, this isn't good because he was like banging the desk. But then when you said, hey, do you want to step outside? And he just got up, I was like, oh wow, maybe, maybe it is because it's like most students in that point would just be like, no, I'm not effing leaving. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. I think one of the benefits is that he is the only student that I have from the class that I also had last year when I began in February. So I think we were able to kind of like build a rapport and that relationship. Um, so because one of the things is that, he sometimes will disrupt class and have some choice words, but it has never reached that level. And unfortunately, so one of the things that I'll be explaining in the case study is that he had some issues with students over COVID, that were so we are part of a school district where we have a traditional junior high school, and then the technical center is attached to the high school. And so when he was, I want to say, a he was in middle school going into his freshman year during COVID, and some of the students that had bullied him are now in the technical center with him, and so there are just occasions where there are some conflicts between him and students in other programs, and it kind of came to a head at that. So
gotcha. Okay. Um, I think your class did a good job then of, I mean, you could hear them giggle a little bit. They were probably uncomfortable, honestly. I think it was given that that was like real in the moment, they probably had that little bit of like nervous laughter, if you will, like, oh man, this isn't great. But then I think, you did a good job handling it because I think you tried in the room to de-escalate him. You gave him an opportunity before asking him to come out in the hallway to see if he was going to redirect. You ignored him at one point, tried to shift back to the student that was attempting to share. It didn't work, which it doesn't always. And then he kind of started to get a little more agitated, and you asked him to leave. Thankfully, he did, which that makes sense because you already do have that relationship with him. But I think that the other students in the room did a good job not interjecting or really getting involved, which sometimes can make it a lot worse if they're like, hey, knock it off, or, stop doing that. And the student can then kind of redirect their anger, if you will, towards someone else instead of just for whatever reason having that emotion in the moment. But it was good to see him come back in. I mean, he had maintained composure for a while. I would agree at the end, he started to kind of go back to the initial conversation that made him upset. And then obviously class was ending, so I don't know how that went, but he, for the majority of the lesson, it seemed as though he was able to come back in, maintain, composure. And then for whatever reason, at the end, he was like, you remember that conversation we had at the beginning? I want to rehash that. But that's okay too, because probably what he needs is somebody to chat with him. It sounds like something must have happened in the school or over the weekend that he had a relatively hard time with. But anyways, that's just that one small part of the lesson. Other outside of that, how do you think things went?
So I think again, kind of like the first video overall, I thought the lesson itself went good, or excuse me, went well. The only problem is that I kind of fell into that pacing trap again, and then the interaction with the student kind of took about 10 minutes out of that. But that's not an excuse. I still could have modified things within the lesson. The one thing that one of my cohort members said was, and I think you've mentioned it and Marie mentioned it, is I will definitely for tomorrow's video be using a watch, so it's a timer. And I'll just say like, and I'll tell the students like, hey, listen, I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes for discussion. And, when it goes off, like, then we're going to move on to the next topic. The hard part is that, like I feel sometimes at this school, like I'm not teaching content, but I'm being more of like a big brother with a teaching license or getting a teaching license. And because a lot of these kids come from really bad homes, low socioeconomic backgrounds, just to be able to get them to talk that is about not only using appropriate language, but that is actually on the topic we're trying to achieve for the class. Anytime that they can do that, I always consider that like a real big victory. But I also realize that the content is important. So one is setting that timer rule for myself for the class. And that's not their fault in any way. That's my fault that I have to be more strict with myself on that. And then the other thing that I will do for this week is do think, pair, share. So rather than have it just be an open forum, I'm gonna have it be more like more deliberative, where they just do that activity, set a timer, and that way we can get into the content. Because tomorrow I'll have them read a couple, like a few summaries from Supreme Court cases. So I really, so if we can't get into that, then we really lose on the whole purpose of the lesson, the objective of the lesson tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think too, so the school district that I work for now as a principal is vastly different than the one that I taught in. I taught in a local school. They're all within like 15 miles, but those 15 miles it's almost like you enter a different paradigm. The school I taught in is the school where my children go to school. It's a district with a beautiful lake, families that, have high incomes versus where I work now. It's a low income, it's a city school district. And, it matters, the students that you're teaching. It shifts and it changes now. We talk often about, I made the comment about the language, but, when we reflect on the students that we're working with, sometimes there are things that we have to not turn a blind eye to, like slowly remind them and hopefully help them switch, that school appropriate language versus what happens in our community and at home is something we want to remind the students of, but we also can't forget the background that the students bring. I often, we just had a conversation on a student. The teachers were like, well, he won't answer a question without cursing in the middle of it. And I said, okay, we need to work on that, but we need to listen to the content that the child is sharing too, because if he's on par and he's able to share an answer, we need to praise that and then kind of cautiously remind him of the language that he's using that we would hope would stop. But if we just focus on that language all the time, the students are going to stop responding because they don't even know what's happening. It's so commonplace for them to kind of utilize the inappropriate language that sometimes it's unintentional. They don't even hear it. So I agree with what you're saying, and just focusing on the fact that right now we're going to get the students to respond. Right now we're going to get the students to feel comfortable and safe in an environment, and then over time work with them on school appropriate language and how they have to learn, because even for employment they have to learn how to switch that dialogue, which isn't necessarily easy to do.
Right. Yeah, and this is, I have to say, I teach 12 programs, and they are probably one of two or three that I had kind of thought about for my clinical, just because they didn't have those behavior or disruption issues. Where my class generally runs, depending on the block, 50 to 60 minutes. But if for depending on the program, if I can get through 25 or 30 minutes, with 30 minutes of like kind of calming the class down for disruptions, then I consider that a win as well. So I totally hear you on that point where like there are students in different programs who they use swear words and curse words sort of like they're just saying or and so yes, to your point, I absolutely give some programs the benefit of the doubt, but there is an emphasis where every Friday they have to fill out a professionalism rubric in their programs, which talks about how they're achieving objectives in their program and their proficiencies, and it's something they do by themselves, but then the teacher has to also give them a rubric. And oftentimes students give themselves like 3 or 4s, but really they're only at a 1 or 2. And yes, the emphasis is on professionalism and using appropriate language, but a lot of these students, I think, probably, like you said, consciously do not know that they're just saying what they're saying, or conscious that what they're saying is offensive or might be a big deal outside in the workplace. So yeah,
it's very tricky, and I think and I love the fact that you have that rubric, because it gives you an authentic time to talk about it once a week, where you don't have to, be worried about constantly pausing your lesson to say, hey, remember, we don't want to utilize that language, but on Fridays you can have that conversation around, hey, let's, take a look. Something that we did with a couple of our students that helped was we recorded small sections of the lesson. And then when we met with the student to discuss the language, we played it back for them. And we said, listen, we just want you to hear yourself speak in class so that you notice, not to kind of say, look at what you're doing, but for that reflective piece to allow them to realize it's happening. Because for many of our students, like I said, they don't know. And even when I engage with them in conversation, they'll call me like bro, or we have to stop and say, okay, remember right now, you can't engage with me that way. We're having a professional conversation. I'm not your bro. Let's think of another word. But they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't even know. And I'm like, I know, but like we still have to take pause at some points. But that's great that you have that rubric that you do reflect with them often on, and let them kind of see where they are versus where they think they are. That's an important conversation. Something else that I thought about that would help you with the time piece, because there's only so much we can do when things like that happen. There's only so much we can modify our teaching and our lesson when 15 minutes get spent on something that obviously we didn't anticipate happening, is using like a digital tool. So when you do something like a think, pair, share, or even when they are going to share out, like you have the 3 branches, making it digital, like I mentioned, using a Jamboard, because it will save you a little bit of time if while they're talking and working, they're putting up their responses. A, it will let you know who's where, and B, it'll kind of save the time of, okay, now let's stop and put back up what we thought. They'll be doing that in the moment.
So I really like using Jamboard. However, I didn't realize that students can manipulate the backgrounds. And so that is the reason why I won't use it anymore, because because students had some, it's funny, even though it wasn't like, it wasn't something that was extremely inappropriate as far as the content, because it's, we have the IT department from the school district that censors what students can go to on their computers, but they were still able to find pictures that were just suggestive in nature that were inappropriate. So that's why I utilized the Padlet for the last activity. Okay. just because I I was like, this is just going to end up not good in the long run. So Yeah.
Okay. And you can talk with your IT department and see what they can do. We have our Jamboard locked down. The only thing that students can do is a sticky note.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
Interesting.
maybe run that by them just to see, because we had the same we had the same issue. And no matter what filter we put on, it wouldn't grab their ability to change it. But then we went into the Google settings and we did alter their access so they can just add a sticky note. They don't have any other options.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and the only reason why I say this because like Padlet's great, but it's a little bit more time consuming on your end. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? And again, I thought the lesson was good when you heard the students engaging in a conversation, they were on task. I thought you definitely handled that student really well, especially knowing now that it was like really authentic in nature because he came back in so nicely. I was like, oh wow, maybe this was something that was planned. I also applaud you then for leaving it in the video. Most people would have edited that out. Because obviously we can't control the content that you choose to keep, but that showed a lot about the classroom environment that you have created because the students didn't react. He came back into the room. He participated for most of the lesson. And it also shows that, something that we're working on and right now in my school system is not like moving directly to, oh my gosh, you can never come back in my room. You've offended me and you need to stay out. You welcomed him back when he was ready, which is extremely important for those, students that do struggle or do come from a background where they can explode, but then are able to bring themselves back down and enter the room. The more exposure to the content we get and the less time they get out of the room is really what we're trying to do ultimately.
Yeah, and I was very proud of him for that. And I told him, I said, if we have about 5 minutes left at the end of class, like I'll let you share your weekends. And that's why I also highlighted when we broke into the activity, and then when we were they were writing up the different roles that each branch has. Like I wanted to highlight his participation, that to try to like motivate him and keep him engaged and active in the process. The other thing is bringing in some fidget toys. He's by far not the only student that has that kind of issue where they can get really distracted and want to leave the classroom. So one of the things I've brought is like some stress balls or like forearm grips that are like 200 pounds. So that way, like, they can really tire themselves out with it while the lesson's going on. But the one thing I want to showcase, and this week is for proficiencies for standards 4 and 5, so more content based. So I guess my question to you then would be for this video, highlight obviously the other standards as far as like the introduction to the class, going over the objective, but this video should focus more on the actual content part, whereas the last two videos I had, I think, focus more on the relationship building, the classroom environment, and making them feel safe and valued. So I was just wondering, based on your opinion, that's what I should focus on more.
Yes, so that's kind of what you'll want to show. And if you can make any connections, which depending on, I mean, right now you were talking about the different branches of government, so that fits into the, real world well. So depending on what you're going to have, you want to showcase how what you're teaching kind of helps solve like a bigger problem, which I think right now, obviously, it's a hot button issue all the time, but even more so like our voting systems and all of that information to kind of make a connection to the impact that it has. And even then somebody brought up, I don't remember if they said China or not, but getting like drafted. So if you can compare it to other cultures and, other branches of or leadership styles and government styles, that's kind of the connection you're looking for.
Okay. So the other idea I had was because this is a digital film class, and the cases tomorrow are going to talk about First Amendment rights in schools. And so what I was going to have them do is kind of like, because I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I have 11 students in this class. So I'd like them to try and create like a PSA about what First Amendment rights you do and do not have, and then kind of tie it into the Supreme Court cases that they're going to be reading about, because they do not favor the students. So trying to get them into, get the students' opinions as to, in the school, other students' opinions as whether or not they think that schools should have the right to like limit free speech for students in schools, and then kind of say, bullet points like, here are the reasons why we don't have First Amendment rights inside of a school that we normally would have outside of a school.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think the creation of the PSA is exactly what it's connecting to the project side of things. So that's exactly what they're looking for.
Yeah. And then to also kind of tie it into, I don't know if like, so my understanding of project-based learning is that it would be multidisciplinary, but because we're not really a school that has that ability, because it's just me and a math teacher and that's it. Everyone else is a programming instructor. So I was hoping that this is something where they would take the lead, where they create the storyline, they create a storyboard, they film it, they edit it, and then they showcase it.
Yeah, and that hits even, just the creation of it is going to hit, you have ELA in there. So you have, you have your digital communications, you have regular communication, you have the history class and all of that content that's hitting. And then obviously graphic design is going to be part of that too, if you do have them do like a storyboard type feature. So you have tons of different disciplines in there. It might not directly connect back to what they're doing in those classes, but you're hitting standards that the other content areas would focus on.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and then is there anything else that you saw in the video or in the lesson plan that I should work on for the next couple of classes?
The only one thing I would think about, especially if you're going to be doing something like a PSA, is you talked about your IEP and 504 students. Think about if you have students that don't have an IEP or a 504 that might be like higher functioning or, the middle and the low, and how you can accommodate that PSA, whether it be you do like ability-based groups, you talked about grouping in your this lesson plan, or if you, add in different sets of directions for students based on their ability. That's the only thing I would think about for your lesson plan is are there students in your classroom that are not identified that could use some modification and accommodation?
Okay.
But outside of that, I think everything looked good. I saw the feedback on your objective. Your objective looked okay for me, but I think that she wants a little bit more specific detail, which is okay. It just depends on the perspective on the objective. So if you want to add like for this one, how specifically they're going to meet the objective. So if it's going to be through the creation of the flyer or what have you, or if it's going to be through an assessment, just add that. And that I think is what she's looking for.
Okay. All right.
Okay. All right. That was all I had though.
All right, I'm typing. All right, great. Okay.
Okay.
And obviously you survived the deep freeze. So
yeah, we're coming out of it right now. I can't believe how cold, like it was so cold. So cold. We had I think Friday in school, we only had like 62% of our students come. We're a walking district for the most part. So they have to walk up to 2 miles. And I mean, you can't walk 2 miles in 15 below weather,
Oh, I could feel my eyes start to freeze by the time I just got from the parking lot to the school door. It was.
Yes. So it's funny you say that. My son had basketball. So I forgot my phone. So I ran to my car, like physically ran, but I must not have blinked enough. Cause when I got back in, I was like, oh my gosh, my eyes were like gushing with water. I think they started to freeze.
I hope we don't have that again for the rest of this winter.
I know, same.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I will. I think so. Now the other thing is this video I edited 100% by myself. So I'm also learning a new skill, which is really awesome. But so for this video, hopefully I'll have it similarly done by like either Wednesday or Thursday afternoon and uploaded. And then same time, Sunday 9 a.m. if that's good with you. And then yeah. So
Awesome.
okay, great.
All right,
Thank you
perfect.
very much. And have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Good week. Bye.
Bye.